Are you or your clients looking for a regular income solution with compelling returns to diversify your portfolio? If so, Neighborhood Holdings may be a great option for you. Listeners of this podcast will appreciate that public markets can be turbulent and finding a good private credit fund can be tough. But Neighborhood's track record, transparency, and investor alignment sets it apart from the pack. With nearly 10 years of consistent performance and a target net yield of 8 to 10%, Neighborhood has a track record of providing monthly income to investors without the volatility of public markets. How do they do this? Where banks invest in mortgages up to 95% loan to value, they also make borrowers jump through a lot of hoops. Many borrowers in transition aren't able to meet those hoops. Neighborhood has partnered with banks and brokers to provide quality borrowers with temporary financing secured by first mortgages at an average loan to value of less than 60%. Where other mortgage funds might take more risk by lending against construction, bare land, or jumbo loans, Neighborhood is focused on your average residential borrower who owns the average house in the neighborhood. Plus, their variable rate with a floor mortgage pricing benefits investors when interest rates go up and mitigates downside risk. Check out the link in the description or visit neighborhoodholdings.com to view the offering memorandum or speak to your financial advisor for more information. That's neighborhoodholdings.com/Loonie Hour. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this information discussed today is not intended to be or construed as investment advice. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a loonie in any of these financial markets.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back.
People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment.
We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble.
Welcome back to Loonie Hour, episode 170. As always, joined by the three amigos, Boomer, Keith Dicker, Rich Diaz, still in Portugal. What's going on?
Go ahead. I thought you were going to say something. I'm still in Portugal, yeah. Since we had the amazing weather of last week, it's basically rained the entire time, so I'm quite sad. But other than that, it's been great. My time here is winding down. Portugal is an amazing country. The people are fantastic. My aunt is an amazing, amazing cook, which makes my mom really jealous. So don't, even though I know she listens to the podcast.
Is it your mom's sister?
My mom's sister is an amazing cook, and that makes my mom a bit jealous. But yeah,
so like sibling rivalry is still taking place.
Rivalry, for sure.
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
pretty cool.
All these years later.
Where are you going next? You're skiing next?
I'm going skiing next. Yeah. So I'm going to Austria. We're gonna. So if anybody's in Saint Anton, they want to go meet me for a beer and talk macro, I'll be happy to do that.
I'll be
there.
So
by the way, in the ski après world, I've never been to Saint Anton, but one of my really good friends, he goes there every year, in addition to Rich. But apparently, the après ski there is legendary. Isn't it like halfway up the hill and everything? And
yeah, there's a place called Crazy Kangaroo, which is like a small let's say East Coast bunny hill up the hill, and everybody parties until like 8 o'clock, and it's dark, obviously, and you've got like conservatively like 400 drunken idiots who then now ski down a hill. Yeah, lots of Brits.
Sounds pretty fun.
It's actually terrifying and very, very fun. And then yeah, somehow last time no one got hurt, and it was great, and that's it. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Boomer, you ski?
I am a very good average skier.
Is there even
I ski?
Is there good is there skiing in Halifax?
Yeah, we have a couple of ski hills. Yeah, it is what it is. It's fun.
Okay.
We usually shoot over. Yeah, we usually shoot over to Quebec for a ski holiday every couple of years, and it's fun.
Hey, speaking of Quebec, the Habs are hot right now.
I told you.
The Habs are hot. That Dobesh guy stole the game from the Avalanche the other day.
Part of the good thing about the Loonie Hour is you get to ride the ebbs and flows of me jumping on the bandwagon and then off again and then on again. And right now we're definitely on. We're gonna win the Stanley Cup. Go Habs, go.
Okay. What else we got today? Why don't we
all right,
share with everyone what's happening? Yeah, it's a big day today.
This country's falling apart. Not only do we not win another medal at the World Juniors, but our Prime Minister, our dear leader, our fearless leader, Justin Trudeau, has resigned, or he says he has resigned, and he has now prorogued Parliament. So what they gave them, Rich? 3 months, basically the end of March. So Parliament is essentially suspended. He's prorogued Parliament, so the Liberals have time to run a leadership race to fill his position. and then they'll go back to Parliament. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to get into it. We've got a special guest this week, which we'll highlight shortly. But I think the issue here, which we'll talk about at length, is the timing of such. He's been down in the polls for such a long time now. He's had so many internal calls to step down and resign for the last 12 months. He has finally picked a time to do it, which is coming at probably the worst possible time, as Trump gets inaugurated in next week, and is suggesting 25% tariffs potentially, and we don't really have a functioning government to deal with that. So Parliament's going to get prorogued until the end of March, and then hopefully you have a non-confidence vote, which triggers the election, and that's going to be another couple month process. You might not have like a real functioning government, a new government, until what, May? Potentially,
maybe never again.
Just to be clear, though, one thing. I'm a stickler on words sometimes, and when Trudeau had his speech, his announcement, I believe his exact words were, "I intend to step down." He didn't say, "I resign, I quit, I'm done." I intend to step down once the Liberal Party has nominated their new leader. So again, people can be a little tricksy sometimes, Rich. The tricksy little hobbit, as they used to say in Lord of the Rings. But that was one of the big things that, he resigned. He didn't resign. He intends to resign. He's still there, man. He's still the guy.
Right. That's right. And after the party, I'll read the quote. So what he says was, "I intend to resign after the party, etc. blah blah blah. After the party selects its next leader through a robust nationwide competitive process." That's it. And
I think they'll have like arm wrestling and like.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. What if they have like a
shot game, and everything?
For it? Like,
yeah.
Or what if he decides that the process was not robust, nationwide, or competitive, and he just says, "Actually, I've decided to stay on." And
yeah, I'm not really sure the legalities of that, to be honest. But I guess you can't rule anything out.
No, I guess we can't.
So
I mean. Anyways, I was just going to say. I mean, it's outrageous, right? Because what it effectively does is, just so people understand, and our guest is going to explain to us what prorogue means. Maybe I'm not even saying that properly, and what it means, how the leadership is going to be decided, right? Because now there's a leadership race. But what it also means, what I do know, is that a lot of the a lot of the work of government has basically been is done. And so a lot of the bills that we've been bitching about, which is bills that the online harms bill, there's like bill, I can't remember what the other one was. There's the CRA thing, right? We're going to talk about. All that stuff is now, that's it. It's done. It's like wiped clean from the sort of business of Parliament, as I understand it. And our guest hopefully will correct me if I'm wrong.
A lot of it is like a little bit complex in terms of like the interworkings of like the parliamentary system and all like the technicalities. And we're kind of all finding this out over the last couple of weeks. But we do have a good guest on this week. So we're going to have a good conversation here for a little bit, just to kind of discuss the ins and the outs of what this kind of means for Canadians. We've also got some huge themes that have been playing out that we've been chatting about on the Loonie Hour, which we'll cover in the back half. Which is in regards to what's happening in the sovereign debt markets, particularly in the UK, China, US. There are some real issues that are developing there that has been a core theme of the Loonie Hour. So stick around for that. But we're going to get into our interview this week with Kate Harrison. So Kate is a vice chair at Summa Strategies, specializing in communication and consumer issues. She provides advice to clients in a variety of fields, including telecommunications, finance, defense procurement, environment, public safety, and transportation. She leads Summa's Ontario government relations practice, crafting and executing strategic public affair plans for clients seeking to advance their priorities. In addition to government relations work, Kate is responsible for developing targeted communication programs for national clients, as well as those at the Ontario provincial level. She's a regular commentator on current affairs and politics as a guest on CTV Power Play, CBC Power and Politics. So she is really the expert on all things government related. So without further ado, let's jump to that interview right now. Kate, welcome to the Loonie Hour.
Happy to be here. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. Obviously, this is it's kind of a complicated topic. I think, I've just been reading all these articles about, proroguing government and the ins and the outs of that. So correct me if I'm wrong, the last prorogation we had was under the Harper government, correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, it's the kind of stuff that would put you to sleep if you read too much about it.
Okay, great. Can you explain what it means?
And try to keep everybody awake.
I've been up late, so I need a nap. You go into it.
Okay, all right.
How do you say it?
Timing.
How do you say it properly? That's the first thing, because Steve needs a lesson. And then what does it mean?
Sure. So prorogation is a tool that exists for government to basically delay what is happening in the House of Commons and in the Senate. Basically put Parliament on pause is the way to look at it. So what it means is that any of the bills that had been advancing through the House of Commons or the Senate, no activity on those. The House doesn't meet, MPs don't come to Ottawa, senators don't come to Ottawa to debate these things. But governing does still continue. So the entire bureaucracy in Ottawa and the civil service, they keep working as planned. Now, how much are they doing in this period of political uncertainty to take on anything new versus simply keep the wheels in motion on things that have already been kind of dictated by politicians of what they'd like to see? That balance tends to skew more towards the latter than the former, right? So we see the maintenance of a lot of government activities, but I wouldn't expect to see anything really new at this point, because a lot of that does require political weights behind it. And so without politicians in Ottawa to provide that, and with a lot of cabinet ministers currently considering whether or not they'd like to run for full-time leader of the Liberal Party, a lot of that more political decision-making will grind to a halt. But Ottawa's not asleep. Things will move, but it will be, I think, at a slower pace than if the House of Commons and the Senate were sitting.
So it's something like in high school when you have the substitute teacher come in. You're still in class.
That's a very great analogy. I mean, you might want to knock it back a few grades in terms of how politicians comport themselves in Ottawa. But yeah,
shots fired.
Well, I'm not sure anybody would disagree, but yeah, it's a great analogy. Like, things will keep moving. Regulations still happen, right? A lot of the funding announcements that have already been allocated, like for which there is current money, like those will still continue and proceed. But do not expect to see, new policy statements, brand new funding programs, kind of operating in a period of supply. So a lot of that new stuff, including, I would mention this, the fall economic statement, which came out towards the end of December. A lot of the initiatives in that were going to require legislation in order to enable it. All of that is totally gone. So we're in a real maintenance hold.
That's like done. So did that include the higher capital gains inclusion rate?
So with cap gains, interestingly, the CRA has sort of interpreted the earlier direction from government and has started applying that, but legislatively it hasn't passed. So this has created a very strange circumstance and dynamic, of course, for those that are dealing with that tax, but also for government. The legislation to enable that did not pass, but CRA has been interpreting it as a direction of government. So that is a bit of uncharted territory. And I think there's going to be some questions about how to, unwind that or what the path is going forward. Unfortunately, a lot of the political decision-making that would be required to discuss these things is on pause because of prorogation. So that is a particularly strange sort of.
Has this? I just hear like lawsuit city with this. So is it? And again, you said like it is very unusual, but can the CRA start charging and collecting a tax that hasn't been approved?
That's a level of procedure or perhaps legality that I wouldn't feel comfortable answering that concretely. From what I understand, though, there perhaps was a bit of leaning in the expectation that this would have been enacted legislatively, and that obviously didn't happen. Now, how that shakes out in terms of, does it result in lawsuits, or are those monies returned? The other thing to keep in mind too is that a lot of folks started making decisions around their investments before the tax came into effect. So I'm not going to say this doesn't have an impact. Of course it does, but a lot of the government's desire to see new revenue come in as a result of that change, there was a breather period there that I think a lot of money was moved or shifted around to avoid such a rate being applied, right?
Yeah, I heard of one example here in Vancouver, selling real estate where a gentleman that owned an rental apartment building decided to sell it.
Yep.
Heard it came out, moved it immediately, saved $1 million in taxes because he was just able to bypass that. But obviously now, as you're saying, they're applying this higher capital gains tax, even though it's not approved, and under the new prorogation of government, this bill is essentially dead in the water. But yet CRA even today is still assessing it as if it's there.
Yeah.
It's actually incredible, I think. And I'm just curious from the business community, as you're trying to make investments, you're like, okay, well, did we dispose of this asset? Is it going to is it going to get charged at this tax rate or the lower tax rate? It's just, how do you navigate? You've almost frozen business and investment activity for the next several months until we figure this out.
Yeah, well, I think it can be applied to the capital gains conversation as much as any around investment, which is that the political uncertainty that exists in Ottawa is creating some economic uncertainty. You probably saw after the Prime Minister's resignation, there was a brief little blip in our dollar. It actually went up when Trudeau resigned. But, we have the capital gains piece and kind of the future of Canada's political leadership in question. We also have this massive incoming threat of tariffs in a matter of, just about 10 days or so, where Canadians are going to be facing another economic pressure. And I would argue one that we're not particularly well equipped to deal with right now, and particularly because we don't have a parliament in session and political leaders focused on this, as opposed to kind of the future of the Liberal Party and some of the other more internal politicking that's going on right now. So the political uncertainty in Canada, I think, is creating quite a bit of investment uncertainty and economic uncertainty. You layer in a 25% tariff for President-elect Trump onto that, and you have a recipe for some really difficult economic times ahead.
What are you seeing from the business community, just in terms of, I guess, the timing is kind of, I'm scratching my head, right? I mean, how many times was he sort of forced or asked to step down from his internal party, and then waiting till the final hour to do it as Trump obviously gets inaugurated next week, and there's all this uncertainty. Can we actually, so I guess my question is Canada in a situation, or do they have the ability to actually negotiate with Trump and actually counter these tariffs, and how much work can actually be done in this capacity today?
So I think there has been some work done on the civil service side, and we've been down this road before, right? With the threat of tariffs, renegotiation of CUSMA. So this is not completely foreign to the government of Canada to deal with. And so, I don't want to be too dismissive of the work of Global Affairs Canada, Finance, and others in trying to prepare for the conversation that happens. But it's also obvious to me that President-elect Trump is not somebody who is going to want to negotiate with a lame duck prime minister, which is what we have right now. Yeah. He's been very dismissive about the country, our leadership. He's talking about making us the 51st state, et cetera. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But I think what I would observe is that Trudeau leaving this decision so late, Steve, has meant we have an empty negotiating chair, effectively. Had this decision been taken 6 months ago, a new leader come in, they get the support of caucus, we might be looking at a bit of a different situation. But the Prime Minister didn't exercise that option. He waited until, I would argue this is beyond the 11th hour. And so he has not just really challenged Canada in terms of our negotiation with the US administration, but he's also made matters really difficult for his successor, right? So this person, whomever he or she may be, comes in, and we might talk about how that process looks in a moment, but this new person comes in, they've got what, maybe at most 3 or 4 weeks to try and create differentiation from Trudeau, make themselves a known entity to Canadians, perhaps get in front of the new administration, come up with a plan to sell to Canadians for our economic prospects before the House returns, and there's almost certainly an election triggered. Not a recipe for success, not laying a good foundation for the Liberal Party to come in and actually succeed. So he's hamstrung Canada, in my view. Trudeau's hamstrung Canada at the negotiating table, but he's also really crippled his party in terms of being able to have any real momentum or demonstrate change when we do have an election.
Kate, is that view pretty well held, like within the business community? Like if you were down on Bay Street, up and down and out and west and everything, and even within, I guess, the liberal part, not but the liberal elites, if you want to call it that, like, do they see it that way as well? Like, it's because it sounds like what you're sharing with us, like it's one person making a decision that has a pretty big wake, attached to it. Or is this something they said, hey, it's not really that big of a deal?
Well, I think, let's look at how kind of the corporate Canada is responding to this, and then, even how Liberals are responding to it. And, disclosure, my bias is on the Conservative side. I'm mainly involved in Conservative politics. The number one thing I hear in my day job as a lobbyist from businesses is, why did he leave this so late with respect to incoming tariffs? I work with a lot of US companies who are trying to make sense of what's happening in Canada, and they do not understand why now was the moment to go, as opposed to perhaps several months ago when there had been some by-election losses. Caucus members were starting to express that they had some dissatisfaction. So they are looking at what the president-elect is saying, what Justin Trudeau has done, and that doesn't make much sense to them, right? But in terms of how Canada is going to meaningfully address this looming tariff threat. So that's what I hear from the corporate community, including a lot of US companies that do business in Canada. For Liberal Party members, the polling that we've seen, and we work with Abacus Data, polling and market research firm, they just had a poll come out this morning that was taken right after Trudeau's resignation to see, do you support this? And an overwhelming number of Liberals supported him stepping down, like something like 70%. The polling prior to Christmas suggested that he only really had the percent of about 20% of identified Liberal supporters. So I would say, yes, there is support for the fact that he stepped down, but there's a lot of issues with the timing of that resignation and how that has positioned the Liberals and the government, both for this upcoming negotiation and relationship building with the United States, but also in terms of their own electoral prospects when we do have an election.
So Kate, can I just jump in there? So, I mean, I have a differentiated view on these tariffs, which we're going to get into maybe later on in the show, but I think it would be unfair not to share them with you now, which is, I think it's largely a distraction. The vast majority of the U.S. Trade surplus, trade deficit is energy products. We sell them oil, and we buy goods and services from them. And I think, and in a staggering amount. And I think that all this business about tariffs, it makes no sense when you look at the trade balance, but maybe that we'll park that for now. My question is about this leadership, is about the Liberals themselves, and how, can you explain how the next leader of the Liberal Party is chosen? And if the rumors that we've been reading on Twitter are true or not?
I will do my best, acknowledging that the rules haven't been released yet.
Okay, fine.
The committee to strike the rules has not yet been formed, but all of these things are going to happen very, very quickly. They'll have to happen very quickly in order to get the process underway. But there are a few things that will be true. Okay, so there will be a fee that candidates pay in order to seek the leadership of the party. In the past, that's been close to $1 million. The rumor that's out there right now is that it might be something like $500,000. Well, if we're talking about an abbreviated campaign of 3 or 4 weeks, that will be exceedingly difficult for a number of people to get that kind of cash together, given especially donation limitations
Kind of
that
seems like a
exist
waste
in
of money,
Canada.
no?
Yeah, there's that too. Some people really want to be prime minister for 72 hours.
If you were the former Bank of England governor, would that be easy or a hard thing to draw?
I would think it
I'm
would be
kidding. You don't have to
easier for
answer that.
him. It would be easier for him than it might be for others. But it's a really important consideration, Rich, because like too low a fee, everyone's in, right? Like every John, Dick, and Harry that wants to be again prime minister for a couple of days gets their shot.
Boomer.
Too high, too high. And you've got a whole other problem, which is like, this is the party of Bay Street. They're the ones that, we're only going to get an elitist establishment candidate at something like a $500,000 buy-in. So I personally would be quite surprised if they were to make it that high. Perhaps it's somewhere, I don't know, in the like 100,000 range or something like that. But that will be a factor and a big one as candidates think about whether or not they want to do this. The second part is just the timeline and how people vote, right?
And who can vote.
Who can vote. And a big change that the Liberals made in 2013 was how you are a member of the party. So in the Conservative Party, you buy a membership. It's like $10 a year. And that is your contribution to the party that makes you a member of the party. The Liberals do not have that. They have something called registered supporters. And the thinking at the time, and I understand the thinking of the time, it's not something with which I personally agree, but we broaden our base of support, right? We want to get people that maybe, they're not feeling like they want to give a $10 contribution annually to stay a member, but they have expressed support for the party or ideals, and we wanted to create that volume of support. The problem, of course, is that when anybody really can vote in the Liberal leadership, you open yourselves up to a lot of vulnerability. And particularly as we're in the conversation around electoral interference, this is going to be a major thing for the Liberal Party to deal with. It's already, been discussed in the Hogue inquiry how nomination races for individual candidates have been manipulated by foreign actors. Like that's already an issue for the Liberal Party. It's an issue for the other parties too. But this is the first time that we're going to have a national leadership for the Liberals who have this, my view, loosey-goosey approach to their membership play out with electoral interference as a backdrop. And of course, that leaves you open to a lot of criticism about the legitimacy of the race, who's participating, and how this.
So, are you mildly suggesting that people who are voting for the next leader of the Liberal Party may not even be Canadian or in Canada, or they may not even be, close your ears, Steve, a real person?
I think it depends on what the rules say. Like truly, this is part of the challenge. So, is this an online vote? How are you proving identification? Who is voting? Is it like, are they Canadian citizens or permanent residents? You have to prove your citizenship when you become a member. Like when you join as a party member, there's like proof that you are who you say you are. When you open yourself up to a supporter class, that doesn't I don't have to send in a copy of my driver's license in order to do this. So it means that you could have a huge number of people participate. But who those people are is increasingly difficult to track when you move away from a membership system. And so these are all things that I think like active consideration and discussion. The Liberals know this is a vulnerability, okay? I do not think that they are blind to that at all. But what they put in place may well dictate kind of who enters the race, the longevity of the leadership, like how they vote. This is a really fundamental thing for them to deal with. And I would suggest it has to be dealt with in a way that does not leave them exposed to the criticism that foreign interference may be at play in their own leadership nomination contest.
I think though it's not who votes that matters; it's who counts the votes is going to matter. So I think at the end of the day, that the next leader of the Liberal Party is going to be one of the two big names that we won't mention right now because we're not going down that avenue. But I suspect that's where we'll end
Yeah,
up.
Is
there-
that is
there's
that because you're
somebody
going to
said
vote for
just-
them, Keith? Keith, is that because you're going to vote for them? Because you're going to
He is
join
in
the supporter
Halifax.
Join,
class?
it's
And then...
free. It's free. No, what I would
I'm
say
cheaper
is
than
that
free. I won't even do free.
they'll have to pay you. No, to me, it is strange that you can cast your vote in a leadership race and not in a general election.
Yeah, no
To
shit.
me, there
That's
should be
bananas.
there should be a congruence there, right? So you can be a 14-year-old international student and vote in a leadership race. You can for the Liberal Party.
Wow.
But you cannot vote in a general election. To me, there should be harmony with general election voting rules, but that will skew participation for their leadership contest.
So
Okay, so
Kate,
let's
once
kinda
this, oh wait, yeah, once this is done, so they have the leader elected on Saturday afternoon.
Yep.
Are they back in Parliament on Monday morning?
No, not necessarily. So the date that Parliament is scheduled to return is the 24th of March. That's when the prorogation period ends. It is possible that the leader of the party is selected in, a month's time, or maybe it's a bit closer to that March 24th date. I think, strategically, there would be a desire to wrap this all up perhaps in a couple weeks before the 24th of March, so that person forms a cabinet, comes prepared with, their desired speech from the throne. I would also just say that there's a school of thought out there that the new person, whoever he or she may be, doesn't even go back to the House. They have the ability to trigger an election on their own, right? So they come in, they don't want to deal with getting shouted at by Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh for 48 hours and having the government fall on the opposition's terms. This person might come in and say, no, I'm not even bothering going back to the House of Commons. We're going to test the electorate, and then we're right into an election campaign.
And so, just out of curiosity, so obviously this probably matters most for our listeners because I think most people are just saying, "Well, when's the next election? When's the next election?
Yeah.
What does this all mean?" So let's just say they pick the Liberal Party picks a new leader. It's Chrystia Freeland, and she can voluntarily say, okay, before prorogation ends in March 24th, she says on March 10th, hey, you know what, let's just call an election now.
Yeah.
Can she do that?
She could do that. She could go to the Governor General and say, Parliament's not functioning. I want to dissolve and go to the election. I suspect the Governor General would grant her that because all of the opposition parties have said, they're going to be looking to bring down the government anyway, so it wouldn't be that surprising.
Do you think that's a high likelihood scenario, though? I'm struggling to see, like, for example, like Chrystia Freeland going out, raising a bunch of money, and then finally being like, yes, I'm in power. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to like torch myself a couple of weeks early here and go to an election. Like, I think I don't know. I would imagine you just try to hold out as long as possible. Like if I'm the Liberal leader, I'm probably saying, well, the more months that I can get before an election, maybe I can convince enough people to just maybe swing the votes. I mean, I'm not a believer of that, but I mean, I'd imagine if you're going and vying for the top job, you have to have some confidence in yourself.
Should they at least want to change the drapes in Rideau Canal? Surely. I don't know.
Yeah, purple, not blue kind of thing at the cottage. There's a couple of factors there. And the biggest variable, I would say, Steve, is just the New Democrats, right? So they today seem to be closed off from the possibility of negotiating with a new Liberal leader. If we find ourselves close to the end of March and the polling has shifted, if we find ourselves close to the end of March and we are dealing with, a massive economic challenge foisted on us by the United States, does that change the conversation and allow for the continuation of Parliament, sort of with an informal governing between, the Liberals and the New Democrats? That is a possibility that is very difficult to predict. In terms of why you would go early, like why you would get a leader in there and then, say, yes, let's go to an election campaign, it would be because you are avoiding the criticism in the House of Commons. Just what will happen is, 48, 72 hours of pain in the House where, you're berated by the opposition for leaving Canada high and dry in this time. And a new person might just say, like, I'm not bothering with that. We're going to an election anyway. I might as well make it on my terms.
Okay, so let's just play the other side then. So, and you might have touched on this briefly, but let's just say Chrystia Freeland says, you know what? No, we're going to ride this thing out. So they're back in Parliament on, was it March 24th or 27th?
March 24th, and then a few things happen in like fairly quick succession that could trigger an election. So the first thing is the speech from the throne. So that's basically when a new session of Parliament starts, the government basically lays out their roadmap, what they want to see achieved. And effectively, for the Liberal leader and Prime Minister, whoever it is, that's going to be their campaign platform, right? Like, we have to assume that that's more or less what they would like to see the ballot box question be, what they want Canadians to think government would do under their leadership. That typically is a vote of confidence. So when a vote happens on the speech from the throne, parties are asked to basically endorse or not endorse that plan. It doesn't have to happen, but typically and historically it is. So that's kind of like the first opportunity the government could fall.
So it would be on the 24th of March.
It would be probably within a couple days of that. So they deliver the speech and then they schedule the vote. You might be looking at 26 or 27 March. There's also supply votes. So we're coming up to the end of the government fiscal year at the end of March. There will have to be a vote on continuation of core funding for the government that occurs around that time. I believe the 27th is the date that it expires. So that is another opportunity, given it's a fiscal bill. That's another opportunity for the government to come down. And then, of course, you've got the Conservatives and the New Democrats already committing that at the first opportunity they could introduce a motion of non-confidence, they would do so. So in terms of the big question, okay, when is this election going to happen? If the timeline today holds, they come back on the 24th, a non-confidence vote is triggered sometime that week. And this is like the most likely scenario today. Talk to me tomorrow, I might say something different, but that's the most likely scenario today. The election campaign is going to be as little as 36 days and as much as 50.
And who decides that?
The Prime Minister, in this case, the leader of the Liberal Party. So I would think that person will want as much time as possible to make themselves known to Canadians. So I would think that they would look toward a longer campaign period than a short one. And that's going to put the election date sometime in May. So elections happen on Mondays in Canada federally. So we're looking at, May 5 or May 12, depending on the length of that campaign. So that's
so this substitute teachers are in class April, May. Another question, fundraising. Is that something that's announced publicly? Do we know right now how much each party has raised? Like,
the fundraising numbers are typically disclosed monthly at a party level. How much individual candidates are raising, I don't know that needs to be disclosed at that frequency, but it will be known, kind of the funding of each campaign. We have very strict rules in terms of how donations are gathered and assembled, both for leadership contests and just as general political donations. And so that is all logged and public. Who's donating to who is also, public information. How fast that comes out is a matter of discussion and debate.
So you're realistically not going to have probably a new government in Canada, like a new prime minister, until realistically, let's call it it's only get their back. Basically, let's call it June.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There will be, if barring no major change, you're looking at, a conservative government. I think they would want to come in as fast as possible to start bringing in some change, signal to Canadians and frankly to the US that they have a plan. We also keep in mind may well be operating without a budget based on the timeline that I just laid out. So a new government will want to come in, I think, rapidly with a fiscal plan for Canada. But in terms of how the pomp and circumstance that accompanies the swearing in and forming cabinet, you really are looking at like a June timeframe for that to occur.
So we put the whole country basically on pause until June, which I think is insane given the realities that this country is facing. Is there any like pushback? Is there any way that this could potentially get overturned and someone could say, "Hey, this is not it's not okay"? I mean, even from what I'm seeing and just on TV and stuff, is that even like staunch liberal supporters that have been loyal to the party and loyal to Trudeau have been coming out and saying this is totally ridiculous. We need to call an election now. This should not be, this prorogation should not be allowed to happen. Given the economic uncertainties that we are facing, is there a legitimate chance that this will get overturned in some sort of court system, or highly unlikely?
I would say highly unlikely. And again, I come back to the role of the New Democrats in this, right? So because we're in a minority parliament, the Liberals had to find a dance partner, which they did really since 2019 in the NDP, to keep governing. Yes, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, has signaled that he would not support the government in a future confidence vote. He had 8 opportunities to do so between September and December and took none of them, right? And
Pension
so
secured now.
that's mid-February. So I think you'll really start to see a lot of consternation happen sometime after that from the New Democrats. But I unfortunately not. Like, I think that this is, for worse, the time frame. And that's why a lot of conservatives have been so exercised about this, right? Like, we are now in an environment where all we're talking about is who's going to be the Liberal Party leader, and not about our economic future at a time when that conversation is, incredibly overdue.
Okay, just to be respectful of your time, I know we're wrapping up. So what are you seeing? Just one of my last questions here is, what are you seeing from the business community, like your clients in particular? Like, are they are they, a lot of them holding off an investment? I'm just thinking like, okay, well, if I'm a business here, and you have to imagine that given the polls and everything that you're going to get a conservative government in the next 6 months, are they allocating today? Are they just waiting for that to happen? What's the conversation?
I think broadly, there is a bit of a holding pattern. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think one is, and this predates the current uncertainty we have, but just Canada is not a particularly warm place to invest, right? Like, we have been actively hostile to business investment for many years now. That doesn't get better with the carbon tax increase that comes in April. Meanwhile, you've got an incoming administration in the US that is laser focused on bringing home a lot of that investment, standing up more manufacturing. And so I would not place all of the economic uncertainty on this current moment that Canada is in. I think we've done a very poor job in trying to make ourselves attractive to investment, and frankly diversify our own economic interests away from the United States, perhaps, than we needed to be in the last many years. But I think that, yes, the uncertainty, to answer your question, just does lead to a bit of a pause on the investment side as well, right? Like, they're evaluating where it's good to invest, how quick even a new government, as motivated as Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre might be, it's going to take a while to change a lot of the stuff that exists today. Like, even unwinding the carbon tax is going to be not an easy thing to do. I think that he will do everything he can to do it, but it's going to take a while, right? So how much can reasonably be influenced even just after Election Day? It's going to take a while to get a lot of those changes up and running, and businesses are holding as a result of the situation we're in.
Can I have the last question?
Only if it's not the same as my question.
I have a prediction for you, Kate. It's not a question.
Oh, my favorite.
God.
I love.
I definitely have a question.
Okay, it is Buffalo 38, Denver 12.
I like
Is that
that.
good?
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Fair enough.
actually, yeah, I think if we manifest that, we're in good shape.
Can you give us a little breakdown, Kate, of what you think is going to happen on Sunday?
Kate's a big Bills fan, by the way, if
Yeah,
anyone hasn't read her bio.
Big Buffalo Bills fan. I mean, the the playoffs are tough for us, and I would say there's more in our favor than not. But like the regular season matchup wasn't great, right? So I don't know. I have to have utter optimism for my football team, because for my takes on Canadian politics are a lot more cynical and glass half empty. So yeah, I have to have unbridled faith and optimism in Josh Allen.
Perfect.
Good. Thank
Rich,
you,
was that
Kate.
your
I love the
question as well?
conversation.
That was, of course, my question.
You guys are
Awesome. Anytime,
super.
guys. And
That-
yeah, happy to help you make sense of the mess.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kay. I'm sure we'll have you back on as the politics here sort of turn up in later this year. So thank you so much for taking the time, and it was a pleasure having you on the show.
No worries. Take care.
It's another good guest. Loonie Hour, we don't feel like we don't miss too often. So that was appreciate Kate coming on with some great insights there. Just all the ins and the outs of Parliament.
She made it sound exciting, actually. That was fun.
It's true. It was interesting.
It is
I still
exciting
can't believe
times
that
in
14-year-olds can
government.
vote. I can't believe it. When I read that, I thought I was just Twitter BS, people spouting all kinds of stuff, and they may change the rules, right? That it hasn't started yet, but
By the
I'm really
way,
happy
guys,
she-
I'm skeptical and stuff, and I can
Yeah.
assure you, regardless whatever rules they have, the intended who they want to have running the party will be the person running the party. Don't
Hey,
fall. I think don't fall for that stuff.
Should we do a Twinkie bet for who's the next Liberal leader for the next
I think
3
we have
weeks?
to. I think
Yeah,
we
we will.
have to. Should
Are we doing it right
Should we wait
now?
a couple weeks? Oh, you want
Yeah,
to do it right
go.
now? Okay.
Rich, go.
I think Mark Carney's going to be the Liberal leader.
Yeah, I'm Carney. I think it'll be
All
Carney.
right,
as well.
I'm going to go Krista Freeland. Spice it up.
Yeah.
Spicy.
Carbon
Twinkies.
tax Carney. Am I allowed to say that?
Spicy Twinkies. Okay, let's move along. Enough of that.
Well,
Let's
yeah.
move along to what else is going on, Steve.
Yeah. So the one thing that we didn't touch on in the interview is so again, the CRA has been applying this capital gains higher inclusion rate. The federal government, remember, they ran just about a $61 billion deficit was just announced, a couple weeks ago, far exceeding the $40 billion guardrails. If you didn't, so CRA is basically, in my opinion, they're erroneously charging this higher capital gains rate. If they weren't, that would be it would push the deficit to about 78 billion, because the federal government earmarked, they were expecting a $17 billion revenue generation from this higher capital gains inclusion rate. So let's just strip that out and say, hey, listen, CRA, they probably shouldn't be charging it. It's now dead in the water. I don't know how it's going to work in terms of, do they start refunding people that paid it in 6 months from now? I have no idea. But hypothetically, it should have pushed the budget to about 78 billion. So the public finances in Canada are a total mess, total disaster. But that kind of goes in unison with a lot of the world right now, which is what we've talked about on the Loonie Hour here is government finances around the world. These sovereign debt markets are a disaster. There's no other way to put it. Rich, I know you're a UK boy there. There's a lot happening in the UK gilt market. Do you want to kind of walk us through what's going on there?
Rich feels real bad about it.
It's my fault, I guess. I mean, the thing is people have been sort of, there's been a lot of hand wringing over the Rachel Reeves budget since it came out. She's gone after farmers. She's gone after private schools. So private schools are VAT, so value added tax exempt. They put tax on private schools, which is, your after tax money spent on education is now being taxed again. It was unambiguously a tax and spend budget, which is what the Labor is and not only that, it was against their manifesto, which is the other thing that's really key, right? In the UK, they have what's called as a manifesto. They outline what they want to do. They campaign on that. And then as soon as they got in, they're like, oh, just kidding. And they raised a bunch of taxes and they spent a lot more money than they said. Now, obviously, I'm being a little flippant, but you sort of get the idea. The problem really is that in my view, the problem is growth and where that growth is going to come from. And I think that's what the market is sort of sniffing out, which is that there is no real plan to get the UK to accelerate its very, very meager growth. So in Canada, we've talked about GDP per capita falling because of the function. There's weak productivity growth. There's way too many people coming into the country relative to their productive capacity. And GDP, which has gone up, but on a per capita basis continues to lag. Almost the exact same story is happening in the UK. You've got horrible productivity growth. You've got the largest influx of people in basically a generation. It's, forgive me, but it's the wrong mix. And their GDP per capita is sort of one of the worst post-COVID. And I think that that's being reflected in high inflation and the gilt market. One last thing, I'll pass it on to Keith, which is energy prices. So their obsession with climate change and renewable energies, which are, again, not fit for purpose, are pushing up basically electricity prices. And along with Germany, they have the highest electricity prices in what the EU, well, UK is not in the EU anymore, but you get the idea. And so that's basically inflationary, and it's killing in the industry. And so Keith's going to tell us what's going on in the gilt
Where's
market.
the UK gilts now? Because you had the Liz Truss moment with, if people remember, we talked about in the podcast, what was it, last fall, where, you know, gilts exploded higher. She resigned in shame, and
yeah. Well, I mean, so at the time when the Truss Ministry is what it's called on Wikipedia, because I had to check it out what day she started, is September 6th of 2022, and basically 10-year bond yields were just over 3%, and within a couple of months they spiked to about 4.5%. Let's just say I'm rounding it, and now the gilt yield is at 4.80. And the other thing that's really important to know is sometimes you have your bond yield move in lockstep with the dollar. So right now we're seeing that with the US dollar. As the bond yield goes higher, the US dollar is tracking it, right? Because there's growth and there's a bunch of stuff, but let's say you're getting a premium for that growth and it's being priced into the bond yield. The problem is when your currency goes the other way. So your currency tanks and your bond yields go up. And that's sort of an indication of a major, major lack of confidence in that economy. And that's exactly what happened in September, October, and November of 2022 with the Truss Ministry. And that's exactly what's happening now. The pound, so sterling, is falling, and gilts are making fresh highs.
Keith?
Yeah, a lot of people feel bad about the UK bond market now. I love my guilt joke. I love that.
That is a good guilt joke. Remember the first time I didn't get it because dummy.
You didn't get the second or third one either. So
no, I didn't get the second.
Yeah. It's like this is a common theme that we've been bantering about here on the show for a long time, in that in our view, we like to say global risk is synchronized and all economies are moving in the same direction. Budget deficits are deteriorating for everyone, including here in Canada, and for the Brits and French and everyone else. We've always believed that it's just a matter of when, not if, that one of the major countries experiences another crisis in their government bond market, and then we would expect the local central bank to rush in and do QE and bail them out and stuff. And we also talk about, has there been a change in trend? Has something happened, or is something developing that will cause this to turn? And the answer to that is no, the trend is continuing. But the election of Trump in the US is sort of accelerating everything, because they're going to use pro-growth strategies that we just heard as well then from Kate, in terms of like attracting foreign capital and things like that. So we've always been looking around, okay, who's going to be the first one to go? Who's going to pop first? And so now you have all of a sudden, is it the Brits is this going to happen to the Brits? So specifically what's happening now in the money world, so the UK banking system is very similar to the Canadian one in some ways, in that, there's a handful of big banks, and then you got like mortgage guys and things like that. But they also have a repo market, as any, proper country would. And over the last 3 days, the number of commercial banks accessing the repo market is gone vertical. So what that means is that commercial banks in London, so the RBS's, Lloyd's, is it NatWest, I think is another one, and HSBC, instead of borrowing and lending to each other for overnight lending, for drawing the line. Instead, they're going up to the Bank of England. So that demonstrates a lack of confidence in the system, in that you actually may not get your money back by lending it to someone else. That's what the repo market means. And now, of course, people who are listening, they might say, well, it also represents that maybe there's not enough quality collateral in the system. And that's what was happening in the US, over the last couple of years. But this has accelerated very quickly in the UK. And now it's a question of, hey, will this be contained again? But we like to look back in time. So back in the late 70s, mid 70s, the Brits had another challenge. And so the 1976 debt crisis in the UK, or the nightmare as they called it, it forced the British government to go to the IMF for a bailout.
Do you know who
Right.
made their money during that time? Or was that a different year? Was that a different IMF bailout?
Is that
What
Soros?
do you mean?
Yeah, I think it was Soros. Was that?
Oh yeah, Soros was 1990. That's when
Sorry.
yeah, that was with the pound Deutschmark peg broke then. But like it's kind of interesting, because you have a debt crisis. It doesn't matter when it takes place. Debt is debt. If you can't access funding markets, and then all of a sudden, hey, you're going to need some help. I'll make another Twinkie bet with you guys. There is not a single Western world country today, or any of I bet you, the G20 guys, if they run into a crisis, will be able to be bailed out by the IMF. The IMF ain't big enough anymore to help with this debt problem that we have out there. So things are moving along. So again, this would catch our attention. And again, from like an insensitive investment manager, I was chatting with Rich earlier, and Rich was giggling. I was giggling. This is exciting. Let's see what happens next. But this is a big event this week for everyone. It's not a Canadian event, but it is a big global financial event.
Well, so you take what's happening kind of in the UK, Rich, in China, bond yields continuing to fall. I think, what is it? Is it their 10-year at the levels last seen during the 08 financial crisis?
Oh boy, you got me. You got me. I'm just looking
Is that right,
at
Keith?
You got me.
You're right, Steve. Yeah. And so it's a big difference because the Chinese 10-year is going lower and lower and lower.
Yeah.
And yet the 10-year everywhere else is going higher and higher. So people might be confused with that, right? Are you guys confused?
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I don't think so.
Yes.
I mean, I'm always
Maybe.
confused, but not on this specific subject.
Maybe, yes. So people who are listening, what it means, remember, the Chinese economy, it's closed. You can't freely move money in and out, so it has to do its own magical things. So within China, they have an enormous debt bubble, and it's breaking. It's like a slow motion, air is coming out. So within China, that stimulates money going into the bond market, for safety and protection. The yield going down because more money is going in. They're actually making money on the bond market over there.
Great performing stock.
Yeah. If anyone thinks they can look at this chart and say, oh, I think I'm going to buy the Chinese 10-year bond, you ain't going to be able to buy the Chinese 10-year bond. That's not going to work for you. Outside of China, the opposite is happening. Rates are going higher because people are, again, they're afraid of this, economic crisis and a sovereign debt crisis we're experiencing. So instead of running into the bond market for safety and protection from something else, people are running away from the government bond market. That's why our yields are going higher here. And I know, Rich, you mentioned with the UK yields going higher and the British pound is going lower. The opposite in the US. The reason it's the opposite in the US is not necessarily because, hey, the US economy looks great, it's getting stronger, people want to buy it that way. It's actually also because foreign capital is running into the dollar at the short end of the curve, for safety.
Just to kind of unpack that a little bit further, but you had the Fed, remember, Keith, we talked about it, which was like, out of the blue, they're like, yeah, we're not going to cut 25 basis points. We're going to cut 50 basis points. So on September 17th, they cut 50 basis points, kind of out of the blue. And again, the 10-year yield in the US was 3.6. So today, they've just cut, what have they cut now? 100 basis points total. The 10-year is at 4.7. So like the Fed's cutting to sort of ease financial conditions, but then the 10-year yield's pushing higher, which is really a tightening of financial conditions.
It's probably not the outcome Jay Powell imagined when he started cutting rates back in September.
Definitely not.
I think, but back then, I think we were smart enough to recognize that, for the Yanks to cut by 50 basis points. Yeah, Rich, because we're still in the British mode, right? The
Yeah.
Brits refer to the Americans, the Yanks. Cut by 50. It wasn't because of an American domestic problem. It was something else going on. And I think actually that was the case. But let's go back to 2022. Everyone knows then the stock market was down 20% or more, depending on where you're swimming. The bond market that year was down anywhere from minus 12% to minus 35, depending on where you are. We could be experiencing that rate again now this year, except the difference back then, the 10-year went from 1% up to 3%, I think. I don't have my 10-year chart up right now. But just to say this year, the 10-year goes from, call it, 4.5 to 6.5.
Oh boy.
Then
that is not.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and then
keep going.
Rich's second favorite metric besides the diffusion index, credit spreads, say they don't have to blow out. They just got to move out a little bit. You're looking at the most conservative investors in the world, just getting mullered here. This is a good setup, Steve. This is a good setup.
Well, yeah. So let's unpack this for the average Canadian that's listening to this and going, well, I don't know, like, why do I care about the UK gilt market and the US bond yields? You want to summarize that, Keith? I mean, what's your takeaway here?
Yeah, we should absolutely be worried about all markets. So it's fun to look at our own domestic market all the time. But the bond market, remember, the bond market is multiple times larger than the stock market. So push the stock market aside for a second. The rate that governments they have to pay to borrow, they're all linked to each other. So the Canadians can borrow at a rate that's plus or minus what the Americans can borrow at, same as the Brits and Europe and so forth. If any one of these countries start to see their rates really spike higher, it's going to scare other investors in the bond world. And then by default, Canada, we will have to pay more to borrow for 10 years or longer. That means banks will charge more for lending. Mortgage rates, even though the overnight rate might go lower, they could stay flat or even go higher. So we could get this contagion effect, and it could be enormous in terms of what we are going to pay to borrow any kind of money. Absolutely.
All these social programs in Canada are getting more and more expensive to administer.
Yeah, because we have the deficit and we have to fund that. And then we have other debt that's coming due that has to be funded at rates even higher. Like this is what would they call it back in university and PhD? It's a shit show, Rich. It's a shit show.
Shit sandwich and everyone's got to take a bite.
That's right. One of my favorite movies, Full Metal Jacket. I mean, it's just about productivity, folks. It's just about productivity. The UK it continues to hollow out its industrial base, import the wrong type of people. Sorry, they don't like to hear it. The data is very, very clear. And unless they get a handle on their industrial situation, the price of energy, and improve their productivity, we are going to take a giant bite out of this shit sandwich. And it's the same in Canada and the same in half a dozen other countries around the world. And the idea that you can just run these budget deficits in perpetuity and have no pain, those days are over, as Keith has said over and over again. And it's something he and I completely agree on.
Perhaps the bond market is going to push the pendulum the other direction.
Well, there's one more thing
of these policymakers.
There's another thing that's really interesting is that we're also seeing, and it's something I've kept a really, really keen eye on, is just higher and higher natural gas prices. And you say, why is natural gas prices related to the gilt market? Well, because the UK, in their infinite wisdom, much like the Germans,
they feel bad. They feel bad.
They need to import their energy. And the other day there was a headline saying the UK wind was the most important or the biggest source of UK energy or produced on the island or in the Isles of Britain or whatever. It's just like, folks, that's just freaking lie. What it is they've started to massively import lots of energy across the channel. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. There's enormous undersea cables that is not only for telecommunications, but power. And they're, because the renewable energies are not fit for service, they're having to drag lots and lots of power across the channel from places like Netherlands. And you're starting to see the TTF, which is the sort of the most important natural gas futures price based out of the Netherlands, is starting to creep higher and higher. And it's basically back to 2023 highs. And that's really, really important because it affects the current account balance, which affects the currency, which affects the gilt. It's all related, folks. And it's just amazing. It's really amazing to watch. I keep saying that I was like giggling to myself because it's why I love this job. Some days it's fascinating. And we're really sort of seeing
what's
some of this
great,
stuff play out.
Yeah, and what's I was chatting with a gentleman the other day, and we're talking about rates and stuff, and I made the observation. He said, "Yeah, absolutely." Again, we had 40 years without rates ever going higher, 10 years where they were flatlined and at zero. Now all this stuff is happening at the same time, and yet, so this gentleman was chatting with one of the big banks, insert the name or color chart, whatever you want. And he's asking the question, like, should we be concerned about the bond market and sovereign debt, credit spreads? And Steve, guess what his response was?
No.
No, correct. That is correct. Yeah. No, you don't worry about that stuff. You just throw it in the fund and be off with it. And that's where I just think this is a little bit of curiosity about how the financial system works and how money flows, the cost of money. And if you back up your big chart and pinch it out, you'll realize, oh wow, yeah, like it's what we just experienced. That's in the past. And the reason we're having all these really cool conversations, and that the UK is in trouble, and governments are falling all over the world and stuff, is because rates are going higher and deficits were always funded at continuously lower and lower rates. People were buying houses because their house prices were going up, and they can, roll over their mortgage, or roll over their mortgage at a lower rate still. And this is a new period now. It's not that it's different this time. This time is still continuing, but it's moving as it should, and people aren't ready for it.
Well,
wait, no, we can't end there.
Can't end like that. Well,
we have to talk about my favorite all-time subject, please.
Which one? Which one is it?
That the banks in Canada are off this net zero thing. They're scurrying off the ship.
Yeah, share that story, Rich. Again, it's a continuation of the pendulum, right? Swinging.
Yeah,
back
the pendulum is very clearly swung from one direction and is moving back in the other direction, I think, regardless of.
Yeah. So anyways, last year, I think, I basically went on a crazy rant and telling everybody, what ESG is about, why it's a complete and total farce, and ultimately why it would inevitably end to sort of people disavowing it, and of course pretending like they never thought it was a good idea in the first place. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. So chalk this up as another Loonie Hour win. We've got some losses under our belts, but the wins are starting to come.
But Rich, explain what just happened this week. Explain what happened.
So there's something called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, led by none other than Keith's pick for the leadership of the Liberal Party and the next Premier of Canada. And basically, effectively, what they're trying to do is legislate emissions via the back door. Now, I might get some blowback from that, but let's be clear, that's what it is. And how and why they're doing that is, if you think emissions is the single most important existential threat to humanity, and there's the legislation and legislators don't have enough power to curb those emissions, what they're trying to do is tried to do is get all the financiers sort of to agree to en masse stop lending to fossil fuel industry sort of writ large. That's like sort of the simplest explanation. Of course, there's some nuance to that. The problem is A, crude oil is super useful. B, Russia invaded Ukraine, which sent natural gas prices spiking. And C, it's a complete farce because China continues to build literally hundreds of gigawatts of capacity in the coal-fired power plant. And as a function of that, so basically all these financiers joined this something called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is to sort of squeeze the ability for these fossil fuel companies to access capital markets and so invest, etc. And one by one, you are seeing the big banks, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and now we're seeing two Canadian banks, RBC, and I can't remember the other one. BMO, basically.
It's okay, they don't advertise with us anymore.
Yeah, they don't advertise this anymore. But basically say, just kidding, we don't want to be part of this alliance because, number one, again, the alliance is bogus. But two, it just doesn't make any business sense for them. It is no longer the topic du jour. It's not. They're not interested in it. That doesn't make sense. The marketing shtick, which is all ESG ever was, is no longer appealing, right? What people care about now is cheap electricity, cheap energy prices. People have always cared about that, by the way.
Cost of living is like front and center now.
Yeah,
people care about like,
and so we will see more and more and more of this until people will look back in 10 years and say, I was never part of the Net Zero Alliance. That's the ESG. We were never part of that. And it's really, really crucial to understand that this was and truly via the back door. This was a supranational sort of, in my view, wholly undemocratic way of achieving policy goals. And the policy goal was, to stop fossil fuel industry from existing.
And Rich, you call the top in that market to the day. You are a legend. You are a treasure of Canada. Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh man, that feels good. Sorry. Okay,
that's really just like the core theme today, right? Which is like everyone, regardless of pretty much whatever country you're in today, like the average person is struggling to keep the lights on and to put food on the table. And so what matters most to them is job security, job opportunity, and cost of energy. And so
this has always been true.
Yeah, it's always been true. I think it's just now it's so magnified. We're just at this precarious time. And obviously, now you think about people's mortgages and the cost of financing those mortgages, they're not really getting a ton of relief as we're seeing in the bond market. And so,
but wait a second, it's related to keeping interest rates low. And you could say, how does low interest rates affect all this? Well, by suppressing the interest rate and the yield curve, it allowed companies, renewable energy companies, to basically take on all kinds of debt and run these businesses that otherwise wouldn't be viable. This is especially true in the UK, and we're seeing that sort of all over the world, really. And this is something else we talked about a while ago. And so anyways, it is that we're seeing all of this sort of unwind, and I think we're going to see more and more of it. I mean, energy is how human beings live on this cold, dark blue planet, and without it, we'd all be screwed. And I think it's just a fascinating sort of interconnection between monetary policy, and energy, the confluence of monetary policy, energy, and government policy, all sort of coming together, and of course, unwinding and unraveling together. So anyway, that was it. Sorry for.
Will this be your pickup line in St. Anton when you're chatting with people?
I will definitely make that my pickup line. Sure. I don't know if people will want that, but yeah, that's it.
Well, I think Keith, that's a good spot to end it. I think that a lot of the core themes are playing out, and it's interesting, right? I mean, I think we put together like a New Year's show 2 weeks ago, kind of forecasting the year ahead and talking about scenarios, and now we're actually finally starting to see financial markets are coming back to life here. It's going to be an interesting year. I think it's going to be probably another volatile 2025, and there'll be lots of things to unpack. So, appreciate everybody tuning in and along for the ride here, and we'll see you next week.